This slide is just talking about other types of cash accounts, because earlier when we talked about the procedure of going through and testing a bank reconciliation, remember we were saying that was the procedure for testing the general cash account. So this is just saying, yeah, for any other type of cash account, such as a payroll account, we follow the same basic procedures. We get the reconciliation, we get the confirmation, test reconciling items, etc. The one other thing this slide does for us is it defines what an imprest account is. Our little definition is down here. And an imprest account is basically an account that sits at a zero balance all the time. And it is just funded when you want to pay something out of it. And when I want to pay something out of it and I fund it, I'm going to fund it for the specific dollar amount that I need to pay out. So this often happens with payroll, right? I want to pay some people out of a specific account, and I'm just going to pay them out of my payroll account, so I'll fund it for the exact amount of that month's payroll. And the kind of nice thing about that is it adds layers of security, right? Because you know how on checks, it has the routing number and the bank account number are listed on all the checks. Like I have a check from Baruch right here that I'm looking at. So this way, because if they pay me with an imprest account, now I don't know, unfortunately, I don't have the routing number and the account number for Baruch's general account, right? So now I won't be able to hack into their account and get all their money. If I hacked into this imprest account, it would just be sitting at a zero balance because they only fund it with the exact amount of money they need to pay out paychecks periodically. Okay, in terms of auditing petty cash, remember petty cash is typically cash that just sits around in a lockbox. Many companies have cash like a couple $100 sitting in a lockbox. It can be used to pay for small cash only type expenses that crop up sometimes in a business. Because it's immaterial, we're usually not doing substantial tests around this or doing tests of controls around this. We might spend a little bit of time documenting the controls, which will often, like I said, be physical controls such as lockboxes, but we'll rarely be performing substantive tests. But we will try to see, hey, what are the physical controls that are preventing this cash from being stolen? And that's what this is referring to with respect to this thing that says potential for defalcation. So defalcation is just another term for misappropriation of assets. I would learn it if I were you, because sometimes it shows up in CPA questions. You never know what vocab they're going to throw at you. So it is a good one to learn. So our test for defalcation is, in this case with petty cash, is just making sure it's in a lockbox in a secure location. Like you can't just get to it easily. Okay, so confirmation.com. This is something I briefly want to talk to you guys about. So obviously when we looked at this confirmation form earlier for cash confirmations, this looks like a paper form, right? It has the financial institution's name and street address. It talked about the fact that there's an enclosed envelope. So it clearly sounds like, hey, this is a form we're actually mailing out and receiving back in the mail. In terms of electronic confirmations, cash confirmations were actually the first type of confirmation that was moved to an electronic format. And this even happened back when I was auditing, as old and ancient as I am. So the last couple of years I was auditing was 2009 and 2010, and we did start adopting these electronic confirmations even back then. And it was this service, so we weren't doing it ourselves through any kind of internal database. It was actually this website called confirmation.com, and it was essentially like a service provider. And you would pay something like, at the time, $50 per confirmation to get them to make the confirmation process very smooth for you. So you would go in as the auditor, you would enter in, hey, this is my client, these are all the banks they have accounts with. Then you give your client the login, they go in and kind of sign their approval, because the bank still needs to know the client is okay with giving you the information. Then confirmation.com directly sends this electronic confirmation form to all the banks. And the nice thing about confirmation.com is they had kind of pre-vetted all of the contact information for all of these banks. So you don't have to go through this process of finding the address or finding the email of the correct bank contact. And banks tended to respond pretty quickly, which is the other nice thing. They kind of did the follow-up for you, because confirmations could take an incredibly long time, lots and lots of man hours, just following up and being like, can you send it? Oh, you filled it out wrong. Can you do it again and send it back? And so we keep having to try, and hours would be wasted on these things. So the other interesting thing about confirmation.com is when it rolled out, a few different frauds were discovered. And that's actually what these videos are, if you want to take a few minutes and watch them. It's talking about how there is one in particular, or a couple in particular. One was Parmalat, which your textbook talks about. So they had been engaging in this fraud where I think management would intercept the confirmation and they would fax it back to the auditor and change some numbers. And I know it sounds like ancient technology, the fax, but we did, even in 2010, we were receiving a lot of confirmations back via fax. And there was another scandal with another company, which is what these videos actually talk about a little bit, where this guy, once he realized that his auditors were going to be using confirmation.com that year, he realized his fraud was going to be exposed, and he attempted suicide because he knew it was no longer going to be possible to kind of continue the charade. Well, I mean, it's a terrible story, but it's kind of interesting because it illustrates, in a sense, how foolproof the electronic confirmation is, and almost how much better it is in terms of being a well-controlled process relative to the old-fashioned mail confirmation, which we tried our best with it, but it was still, a flawed process, clearly, because people were still able to take advantage of it, which was much more difficult to do that with the electronic confirmation.